ASP.NET and Angular are two amazing programming languages that you should have under your belt so that you can land yourself a job as a full stack developer. In this video, we will use these two programming languages to create a full stack application using ASP.NET Core as our backend web API, and we will use Angular as our frontend framework. The application will save your contacts through a backend web API that the users of this application will use from this beautiful Angular application that has been styled with tailwind CSS. The application shows the list of contacts that we have and are coming back from the web API and that are stored in our in-memory database, and we will later on convert that in-memory database into a SQL Server database as well. So on the right over here you can see the list of contacts, and this form over here is used to add a new contact. Also you can use the call facility to call a particular contact, and also you can delete a particular contact as well. So this is what we are going to build in this series. So without wasting any further time, let's get right into it. To begin with, we would need three things. We would need .NET 8, which is going to be used to create the API that we have. So I will download and install .NET 8. I already have that installed in my system. But if you come to this website, you can install .NET 8 SDK for the operating system that you have, and also install .NET 8 runtime for the operating system that you have. So download both of them and then install it. The next thing we will need is to install Node.js, and that is needed to install Angular CLI. So come over here and install this, and also a compatible version. So if you are going to use Angular 17, these are the versions that you can install. I think I have 18.18 installed, but you can come over here, you can go to their downloads page and install the compatible version of Node.js. It's an installer file again, and you can easily install it. Once you've installed that, it's now time to install Angular CLI, which I also have installed, but the command from that is npm install at Angular CLI, and that will install the latest Angular CLI version for you, that is 17. Alternatively, you can also go to the npm website, Angular CLI, and if you go there, you'll get all the instructions of how to do that. And over here you can see that we have this command npm install at Angular CLI. So use this command and it will install Angular version 17 for you. So you can see in my system I have .NET 8 installed over here along with all the other SDKs, but that's unnecessary. And for Angular CLI I have the Angular version 17 installed as well. So now it's time to first create our API project. And for that I will open Visual Studio 2022 and make sure you have the latest version, because then it will also have .NET 8 as the version available to create a template of the API. So from the starting screen I will create a new project. So I'll click on this button, and from the templates that are available to us, I will select C# all platforms and web from these drop downs, and over here I will go on to select ASP.NET Core web API template. So this template will give us some files automatically as part of the project, and it will be easier for us to create our web API. Now it's time to give a name from this project. And we are trying to create an application for storing and retrieving contacts, and we can call it Contactly or any other name that you suit. Contactly, and that will be the solution name as well. Now we want to give it a location, and I have created this folder with a newly created Git repo. So I will create two folders over here, one for the API and one for the UI. So first of all I'll create an API folder, and in this folder I want to create our ASP.NET Core API. So I'll choose the location, paste it in here, and then click next. In the next window, I'm choosing the framework that I want to use to create this API, and because I have .NET 8 installed and I have the latest version of Visual Studio, I can see the option of .NET 8 over here, which is the long-term support. So I'll select that, and I will keep everything else as is. So I will click on the create button. After a few seconds, Visual Studio creates us a ASP.NET Core Web API solution. And if you look at this inside, which has the Solution Explorer, we can see that over here we have the properties folder, which has the launch settings.json. And over here, it has different profiles in which you want to run your application, and we'll be running in the HTTPS profile, and you can see that the port that it has assigned my application is port 7043. So your port could be totally different depending on the project that you have created, and that's under the launch settings.json file. After that, we also get the controllers folder over here, and in here we have the weather forecast controller, in which we get the get method by default. So we have this one API endpoint, which is the get method, but we'll be creating our own controller and endpoints, so we won't be using that. And you can run this application using this button on the top, which is HTTPS. So you just click on that, it'll open a browser of your choice that has been configured, and it'll run Swagger UI. And using Swagger UI, you can test your application, the web API. Here we are going to install some packages for Entity Framework Core, and then create some domain models for ourselves. So first of all, let's install some packages. So first of all, I'll go to the project and right click on the project, and I will come to the Manage NuGet Packages window. And in here, I will go to the Browse tab and will search for this particular package, which is Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.inmemory. You can pause the video over here and copy the name, and I'll search for that in the Browse tab over here. And as you can see over here, I have Microsoft.entityframeworkcore in memory, and that's pointing to the same framework that I'm using, that is .NET 8. So I'll click on the install button. Once that is done, I can close that and close this window as well. So now we have installed Entity Framework Core, and it's now time to create the domain models for our application. That is the domain model for a contact. So I will come over here in the project, and I will right click to add a new folder. And I will call this folder, let's say models. And inside the models, I can have another folder called domain. And I will keep any domain level DTOs or classes inside here. So the first class I will create over here is the contact domain model. So right click on this folder, add a new class, and I will call this class contact.cs. Click on add, and this should create the contact class for us. Now that we have created our contact domain model, we are going to create some properties that will be the state of what a contact will look like once it is in the database. So basically, every contact has a name, a phone number, maybe an email as well, and so on. So we'll create properties for that. Apologies for stopping the video, but I have to tell you that I have created this amazing course on Udemy that teaches you how to create a real-world full-stack application using ASP.NET Core, Web API, and Angular. This course is the most comprehensive guide to building full-stack applications, and I think you would love the course. To my YouTube audience, I have this course on discount, so click on the link in the description of the video to avail the discount. So now let's jump back to the video. The first property that we will create will be of type CRUD, and the name of the property will be ID, and this will be our primary key for the contact that will be saved to the database. Then we will have a property of type string, and the name will be name, because this will be the property that we will use to store the name of the contact. And I've kept it as a required property because we want users to fill this so that we can set the property in the database. The next property that we will have is an email property, again of type string, and that will be nullable. So we have the question mark over here. The type of this email will be null or a string. Then we have a required string type of phone. We'll add the phone number over here. And then finally, we'll have the property of type Boolean, and we will save if this contact was a favorite contact for the user, and maybe a separate list for it, or maybe the favorite contacts go on the top, something like that. So now we have created the contact domain model. It's now time to create the DB context class. A DB context class in Entity Framework Core is basically a bridge that talks between the contacts web application that we have over here and the database that we have. So whenever we need to fetch the data from the database or add some data to the database for this table, the DB context class is used to communicate this thing with the application. So let's create the DB context class, and for that I will first come to the project over here, right click and create a new folder, and I will call this folder data. And in this data folder, I will create a new class. So add a new class, and I will call this the DB context class. So I will say this is contactly DB context.cs. So we have this new class created, contactly DB context, and this class will inherit from the DB context class. So DB context, so control dot again, and for this we have to install Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So we will find and install the latest version. And now that we have this implemented over here, we will create a new constructor for this class. So you can create it manually using CTOR, or I can just point the click on here and press control dot or control period and generate a constructor with the options parameter. So this will create a constructor for me for the contactly DB context class with the DB context options, and it's also passing these options to the base class constructor. We will use these options from the startup or the program.cs file when in the next step when we create our the connection string for this DB database. So now that we have created the constructor for this class, it's now time to add the properties to this class, and these properties acts like a bridge that we were talking about between the application and the database. So every property that we have will be a dbset property, and that will represent a table inside the database. So for that I will create a property. So prop, press tab, and that will be of type dbset. And dbset takes a type, and the type of entity that we want to create is our domain entity, which is the contact. So I will write contact, and this comes from contactly.models.domain. The name of the property, I will have it as contacts. So this way we have written our DB context as well, but before we can actually use the DB context inside the controller or the repository, we have to inject it. So we have to come to the program.cs file, and we have to inject our DB context class. In the program.cs file, we will inject our DB context, and we will write over here builder.services.add DB context. And it takes a type, and we will provide the type that we just created, which is the contactly DB context. So contactly DB context, and it comes from contactly.data at the data folder. After that, we will open and close brackets, and in here we will use options such that, and in the next line I'll say options dot use in memory database, and that comes from the Microsoft.Entity Framework Core package. And inside brackets we have to provide the name of the database that we want to create. We can call it contactsdb or anything you want to, and that is the injection of our DB context. So now that we have injected the DB context inside the application, we can use it inside the controller or different classes as well. Apologies for stopping the video, but I have to tell you that I have created this amazing course on Udemy that teaches you how to create a real-world full-stack application using ASP.NET Core, Web API, and Angular. This course is the most comprehensive guide to building full-stack applications, and I think you would love the course. To my YouTube audience, I have this course on discount, so click on the link in the description of the video to avail the discount. So now let's jump back to the video. So first of all, we will create a new controller. So on the controllers folder over here, right click and add a new controller. Over here, we will come to the API templates, and I will choose the API controller empty template. Click on add, and we have to give a name for our controller. So we will give it as contactscontroller.cs. Press add to create the controller. And in the controller, we can see that it's inheriting from controller base, and we are telling the application that it's a type of API controller because of that attribute, and the route or the URL parameter for this controller so as to reach this controller is API / the name of the controller. So this brackets over here, the square brackets, represent the name of the controller. So basically it's the same as API/contacts, and this is just a way for it to swap the name of the controller over here. So we have got our first controller. It's now time to write the endpoint to retrieve all the contacts from the database. I know we don't have any contacts at the moment, but we still want to retrieve an empty list from the database. So first of all, I will create a get endpoint, because in REST APIs we use the get endpoint to denote that it's a get call. So we are fetching something. So I will write in square brackets HTTP get. And after that, I want to define the method, the endpoint. So I will write public iActionResult, and the name of the method can be get all contacts, open and close brackets, and complete the method. Apologies for stopping the video, but I have to tell you that I have created this amazing course on Udemy that teaches you how to create a real-world full-stack application using ASP.NET Core, Web API, and Angular. This course is the most comprehensive guide to building full-stack applications, and I think you would love the course. To my YouTube audience, I have this course on discount, so click on the link in the description of the video to avail the discount. So now let's jump back to the video. Now this method will give us the list of contacts that are present in the database, and you know how to contact the database. We use the DB context file that we injected in our application. So we have injected it so we can use it inside the controller, and we will use constructor injection. So first of all, we will have to create a constructor for this class, and I will write CTOR, which is a shorthand, and that will be the contacts constructor. And inside the constructor, I will inject the DB context class. So I will write contactly DB context. That's the name of our class, and we want to inject that class, and I can call this DB context. So by this way, we are injecting an instance of the DB context class, and because we are using dependency injection, ASP.NET Core automatically handles that for us, and we will get a instance of the contactly DB context class. So first of all, it's being injected over here. I want to store it in a read-only property over here. So I have pressed Control dot and created a private read-only field over here. Now I can use this DB context inside my get all contacts method, and I will say DB context dot, and when I press dot, it gives me all the properties that I have inside that class. And if you remember, we created a property of type DB set, and the name of the property was contacts. If I open the DB context class again, you can see this was the property that we created, and we treat this property as the contacts collection or the table that is being represented in the database. And we will use the extension .toList to convert it from a DB set collection to a list, and we can store it inside a variable. So variable contacts, and these are the contacts that are present in the database, because all we have to do is to call the DB context class the contacts table to get the list back. And behind the scene, Entity Framework Core is doing all the heavy lifting for us and is getting the list back inside this variable. Now the endpoint will return this list as a response. So over here we can use the return keyword, and because this is a RESTful API, we will send a OK response, which also converts to a status 200. So we will send the OK response, and as a response we will send all the contacts back to whoever is calling this API. Now we have made the changes to this method. It's now time to test it. So I will use this button over here, the run button, and it will open the browser for us. So we get Swagger UI, which is like a UI application to run and test our APIs, and it clearly shows the controllers that we have as the contacts controller and the weather forecast controller. We'll be only working with the contacts controller, and it shows that inside the contacts controller we have one API endpoint, which is a get endpoint, and it is pointing to API/contacts. So if I expand on that and try it out, we can see that as a response we get the success response, which is status of 200, and we get an empty array back. And that is correct because we don't have any contact in the database as of now. But in the coming lectures we'll be adding the data to the database using our controller, and we'll be fetching this result again. And in RESTful APIs, we use the HTTP post keyword to represent that we are going to add an entity into the database. So I will use the HTTP post attribute over here, and then we'll start with the method definition. So public iAction result, and we can call this method add contact. Now this add contact method needs some details of the contact that needs to be added. For example, if we open the domain model that we have a few properties that needs to be filled. We have the name, email is optional, we have the phone and favorites as well. Now by default we can set the favorites as false because it's a boolean, but otherwise we need all these details apart from the ID from the client that is trying to add this contact. So first of all, we will create a new model which will be a DTO, which is a data transfer object. So inside models over here, I will create a new class and I will call this the add request DTO.cs. Press add to create this class, and this will have similar properties of what we have inside the contact.cs file. So I will copy from the name to the favorites. I won't copy the ID because we don't want our Angular application to send the identifier. The API will create its unique identifier. So copy all the other properties and paste it inside the DTO over here. Now we can close both of them. In the controller method over here, we will now accept this as a parameter. So we will accept the add contact request and press control dot. So I have to rename this as add contact request DTO because it's adding a contact. So just to be clear, now I will use the same name inside the controller over here and press control dot. It comes from the models folder over here, and we will give the name as request because it's a request that is coming inside the method. Now we have to map this request from the DTO to the domain model because Entity Framework Core only deals with domain models. It does not know about anything else. So the DB context class that we have, if I show you that again, we have the property of type contact, and it's a collection of this contact types. So all it knows is the domain model contact. It doesn't know about the DTO. So what we have to do over here is we have to first map the request into a domain model of type contact. So over here we'll say variable domain model contact is equal to new contact, and that's this contactly.models.domain folder. And inside here we will assign the fields. So we have the ID, which we will give a new ID. So I can use GUID.new GUID method. After that we have the name, and that's coming from the request. So request.name. After that we have the email is equal to request.email. Then we have the phone is equal to request.phone. And finally we have the favorite property, which is request.favorite. Now that we have mapped the request DTO into a contact domain model, we can now use this contact domain model and save it inside our database. And again, we will use the help of the DB context class. So after we have done the mapping, we will use the DB context class contacts collection, and we will use the add method. So using the add method, as you can see over here, it requires the contact domain model, the one that we have created over here. So I will use this and pass it to the add method. and finally I will save the changes. So Entity Framework Core requires you to save the changes before it will reflect. So I will use the DB context class again, dot save changes. Finally, when you have saved the changes, we want to return a response to the user. So I will return an OK response with the newly created domain object, which is the contact. So now we have created this endpoint for the add contact, and it's time to test it out again. So I'll run the application. Apologies for stopping the video, but I have to tell you that I have created this amazing course on Udemy that teaches you how to create a real-world full-stack application using ASP.NET Core, Web API, and Angular. This course is the most comprehensive guide to building full-stack applications, and I think you would love the course. To my YouTube audience, I have this course on discount, so click on the link in the description of the video to avail the discount. So now let's jump back to the video. When I run the application now, inside the contacts controller, we get this new endpoint, which is the post endpoint. And using this post endpoint, we can clearly know that this is going to add a new contact, because that's how RESTful APIs work. And we are following the RESTful APIs in here. So I will click on try it out. And this is the object that needs to be passed from the user or any client application, be it a JavaScript file or a Angular application or a React application. It needs to send these details so that our web API can add these details to the database. So I will give some values to these properties. So I've given a name, a fake email, some phone number, and I've set it as favorite equal to true. So now I will execute it and let the magic happen behind the scene. Now our web API has returned a 200 success response. That means the code or the contact was added to the database successfully. And also you can see the newly created identifier over here. Now we are going to use this endpoints and the RESTful API that we have created in the Angular application that we are just about to create. And we will use these two endpoints to get all the contacts in our Angular application. And then we'll use the add contact endpoint as well to add a new contact from our Angular application. So let's create the Angular application now. I will come back to the folder structure that we have. We have the API folder over here. So I will create a new folder for the UI and I'll call it the UI. You can call it whatever you want to. Inside the UI folder, I will open the command prompt window or the PowerShell window over here. And I will make use of Angular CLI to create a new Angular project with version 17 of Angular. So I will write the command ng new for new project, and then I can name this project whatever I want to. So I will name it contactly.web. And if I press enter, it will start to create this new Angular application for us. It's asking me if I want to use CSS as my style sheet or the different options. I'll use CSS, and it's asking me, do you want to enable server-side rendering? So we will not enable server-side rendering for this video. That is for some other video. After a minute, Angular is created, the project has been created, and we get this folder over here, the contactly.web folder. And inside that folder, we have a lot of files, which has the node modules, the packages that Angular needs, and some other files as well. And we'll talk about the files as well, but from the PowerShell window, I will basically come one level deep, which is inside. I'm at the moment inside the UI folder, so we will go to the contactly.web folder. So I'll say cd contactly.web, and over here I will open Visual Studio Code in this folder. So the shortcut for that is code space period or dot, and you can click on that. Otherwise you can open Visual Studio Code manually and open this folder manually as well. After that, you can see that these are the same files that we were looking at inside the folder over there. And even though it looks like a lot of files, you don't have to worry about all of them. The majority of stuff happens inside the source folder over here, which has the app folder, which is the main component that is getting rendered when the application will start, and I'll show you that soon as well. We have the index.html, which is the main HTML file, and inside the body you can see over here we are loading the app root component. Now you know everything inside Angular is related to components, and this is the app root component that we are loading, and that's the same folder that you can see over here. If we open the app.component.ts file, we have the selector as app-root, and this is the same selector that is being used inside the index.html. Now, adjacent to the app.component.ts file, which is the TypeScript file, we also have the HTML file, which is also using the same name, app.component.html. And this is the HTML that will get rendered once we run the application. Now, it's time to run the application and see what we get out of the box. You can do that from the same PowerShell window that you have, but you can also open a new terminal from Visual Studio Code. You can go to Terminal and click on New Terminal. And over here we can write ng serve -- open, and this will basically run the Angular application for you. Now this command runs the Angular application, and as you can see, it's saying here it's running on localhost 4200 port, and yours will be similar as well. Now if I go back to the browser, you can see that the Angular application is running. It's running on localhost 4200, and this is what we get out of the box. Basically it's pointing to some documentation and tutorials that Angular has, but all of that is basically coming from what we have inside the app.html. So app.component.html is rendering what you see in the browser, and if I basically select all and replace that with let's say this is app.html and save that, you should see that rendered over there as well. So you can see that the main code that was getting rendered was from this app folder, app.html over here. So with Angular we also get hot reloading, so anything that you do over there eventually gets transmitted to the browser, and the browser gets the command to reload the page. Apologies for stopping the video, but I have to tell you that I have created this amazing course on Udemy that teaches you how to create a real-world full-stack application using ASP.NET Core, Web API, and Angular. This course is the most comprehensive guide to building full-stack applications, and I think you would love the course. To my YouTube audience, I have this course on discount, so click on the link in the description of the video to avail the discount. So now let's jump back to the video. So now that we know that the HTML is coming from here, it's now time to work on our application. But before we do that, we also have to install tailwind.css to style our application. So let's do that. I'll come to the documentation of Tailwind CSS, which also has the documentation of how we can integrate that with Angular. You can go to their website and search that. Now I have created my project and I am inside the project, so we have to use this command npm install tailwind post css and auto prefixer. So I'll copy that and come back to my terminal over here, and I'll stop my application first, paste this command and let it install tailwind css. After running this command, the next thing we have to do is to run this command npx tailwind init, and we'll come back to the terminal over here and enter this command as well, and then let's also see what it needs to be done next. Now you will get a new file, tailwind.config.js file in your solution, and we basically have to replace what we have in the content section over here. So let's go back to the application. Now that this command has been executed, I can come back over here. If I scroll down, we get the tailwind.config.js file. The content object is empty at the moment, so we will replace that with what I've copied from the documentation over there. So I will save that, and the only other thing left over here is to copy the styles. So the base styles are applied to the website using these 3 lines of code, and we can do that in the styles.css, which is the main CSS file, which is the overall CSS file, and by doing that I have applied Tailwind CSS to the solution. Now it's time to use it, but we have to run the application again. So ng serve -- open. The application is running again, and we can check if the styles are working by copying this h1 command, which also has some Tailwind CSS styles. To learn more about Tailwind CSS, you can go to the website. They have amazing documentation and it's really easy to use. And I think it's so much better and flexible than Bootstrap CSS. So give it a go. And now we'll come back to the application over here, and inside the app.component.html I will replace that with the h1 tag which says hello world, and also some Tailwind CSS classes applied to it. Once I save it, if I go back to the browser, it should apply those Tailwind CSS classes over here. So as you can see, with those classes we have changed the style of this h1 tag, and from now on we will use Tailwind CSS to style our application as well. Now the first thing we will do is that we will create a method that will call our API to get all the contacts back, and we will do that inside the app.component.ts file. We will load the data in the TypeScript file and then pass this data to the HTML so that we can display it on the screen. So over here we will create a private method called getContacts, and this has to go inside the component over here, not outside. And we can also get rid of the title over here because that's not required anymore. Now inside the get contacts, we have to make an HTTP call from this Angular application to the API that we created, and make sure your API is running. So my API is running, and this is the URL that it is pointing to. And if I open here, it should have at least one contact and maybe more, but because we are running an in-memory database, whenever you run the application again, you should have an empty response back. So you can do one thing, you can basically make sure that you have some data over there. So I'll quickly create the data. So I'll post this data, and I want to confirm that from the API that it's there. So execute the get command again, and I have one contact in my contacts list. So we know that the API is working. And now let's come back to the UI in the Visual Studio Code and make an HTTP call. And to make an HTTP call, we use the HTTP client module that Angular framework provides us. But because we are using the standalone components over here, because we are using version 17, now we get standalone components by default. We have to import those modules over here inside every component in which we are going to use that particular module. So first of all, in the imports array, we are going to import the HTTP client module. So HTTP client module, and then we have to inject the HTTP client inside our component over here. So we'll say declare a variable HTTP is equal to, and we'll use the new inject method to inject this rather than the previous constructor injection, and we will inject HTTP client over here. Now once we have the HTTP variable over here, which is the HTTP client, through this we can make HTTP calls to our API, and the way to do it is using this .http .get method, and it returns a response back, but we'll come back to that. And then it will need a URL to go to, which can be as a string, and the URL it wants to go to is the API, which is in this URL. So I'll copy just till the port number over here. So I'll paste that here, but the API actually goes to the controller. So it goes to /API / the name of the controller, and that's the route that we have given to the controller. You can also verify that using Swagger. If I come over here, this is the complete path of the get command. So you can see, you can copy this command as well, and using the HTTP get keyword, I can just directly paste this command from Swagger, and using this I can make HTTP calls. Now the HTTP get method returns an observable to which we have to subscribe to. So whenever we get a value, we subscribe to those observables, and the the things that subscribes to these observables gets the latest values from that observable. So over here, as a return type, I'll use the colon and say observable of type something, and we will define the contact model over here as well, because we have defined it in the API but we haven't defined in the UI. So in the folder structure inside source, I can create a new models folder and say this is the contact.model.ts, and in here I will use an interface. So export interface contact, and it will have the same values as we have over in the API side. So we have the ID, name, email, phone, and favorite for a favorite as well. So we have the same number of properties and the same name for the properties as well, so that we can bind those values together once we get the response. And as a return type, we are getting multiple contacts, so it'll be an array of contacts. So contacts, so I'll say contact, which is coming from the model, and that will be an array over here. And the same thing has to be done to the get. It takes a type, and the type that we are returning is a contact array. Now we will just use the return keyword to return the result back. Now that we have created this private method, we will assign the value of this private method into a variable. Let's call it the contacts observable, denoted by a $sign, and we'll use the equals sign and get the value from this dot get contacts. So we will call the contact observable, and we'll use the async pipe, which is a way to subscribe to observables inside the HTML over here. So we will make use of the contacts observable inside the HTML over here. So I don't need this h1 tag anymore. And just to show you how we can make use of the async pipe, we'll first have to import that inside the imports array. So I'll use the async pipe over here, and then I'll come back to the HTML and use a if statement. And these are the new if statements that we get in Angular 17. And if you've seen the ng if statements that we used to have prior Angular 17, this is the new way that we do it now. So we want to subscribe to the observable using the async pipe, and the name of the observable that we have is contact $, which is the contact observable. We use the async pipe using the pipe operator and then say the word async. After that, we can get its value as a variable, so as contacts, and I'm using the semicolon over here. That's in new notation as well. And inside that, I can make use of the contacts variable if this this observable has been subscribed properly. So if it has a value and if it is emitting a value, it will get stored in the contacts variable over here, and I can basically then loop into this contacts array and display the results. So over here I will say at if contacts dot length is greater than 0, then show something. Otherwise, we can also say at else, and I can just say a paragraph and say no contacts found, like that. And if I was able to find the contacts, at least one element in the contacts array, I want to run a for loop and basically run through each of the contacts and display it on the screen. So I'll use a for loop for that. The collection I want to iterate on is the contacts collection. The item is here, and now for each of the item, I can just say, for demonstration purposes, I'll log it into the paragraph using curly braces. I'll say item dot, let's log the name. So I have only one contact by my name, so it should display my name over here. So it's now time to see what we get in the browser. So I'll come back to the browser and right click inspect, and we should get an error over here. If I go to the console, I should see an error that says cross origin request blocked, and that stands for CORS. The same origin policy disallows reading the remote resource at this. So what is happening is that our Angular application that is on this particular URL is trying to communicate with our API application that is hosted on a different URL. And for security purposes, all modern browsers basically block this request because it's going from one URL to another URL, and that's why we get this CORS error. Now it's a very easy way to, for the server, which is our API, to accept these connections. Now we can come back to our API. We'll have to stop the application. We'll go to the program.cs file, and over here we will write a command for CORS to accept all the headers, all the methods, and all the origins. So after we have this line of HTTPS redirection, I will say app.useCORS. I'll use this method and say .allow. Inside that I'll create a policy such that policy.allow any header .allow any method, and the last one is allow any origin. And using that, we have basically defined a policy that accepts all of these things. Now we are only doing this for testing purposes, and it's fine for my example, but when you're going for production, you have to basically only allow for the origins that you want to accept the connection from. So with that, we'll run the application again. And because we have run the API again, we shouldn't have anything in the contacts array because we are using the in-memory database. So I'll quickly go ahead and add the new contact. Now that I've added one contact in the array, I can come back to the browser where I have the Angular application, and previously it was showing me this error, but without any changes, if I just refresh the application, it should now be able to make a connection to the API, and it's able to bring back this result from the API. So that is the contact that I have. It's my name, and that is getting us returned from the API. I've now added another contact, and if I click on execute, I should get 2 results back. And if I now come back to the Angular application and refresh it, I should get the 2 results back on here as well. Now you can see our get operation from the Angular side of things is working as well. It's not the most prettiest of sites ever, but I do want to use Tailwind CSS and style this application. If you're not into styling or into Tailwind CSS, you can go to the GitHub repository for this application directly, and you can copy the source code from there. I'll put a link in the description down below, so you can go there and copy the HTML yourself over there. So back to the application, we now want to style this app.component.html, and I want to use half of the screen for the form that I will use to submit a contact or add a new contact, and I want to use half of the side to display all the contacts. So first of all, I will create a parent div, and I will give it 2 classes, flex and -screen, h-screen, so it occupies the whole height of the screen. Inside this div, I will have 2 divs, one that represents the left hand side and one that represents the right hand side. First of all, we'll make some changes to the right hand div over here. I will give a class of w-50% to both of these divs so that they both occupy half of the screen. So we have 2 divs over here. Now in the second part over here, in the second div, I will also have an overflow auto property. If we have more number of contacts than the height of the screen, then we'll have a scroll bar like this one, and that's what this class is for. After that, we will use this if block that we created in the last lecture and paste it inside this div over here. Now we are checking if there's a value to this observable. If there is, we are storing it in the contacts array. Now when there are more number of elements greater than 0, then we are iterating through each of the contact inside this array. To display the individual contacts, I won't use a paragraph, but instead I'll use a on the list over here, and this is a unordered list, and I'll use the for loop inside of this unordered list, and I will create list items inside this unordered list. So li element, and I will give it a few classes. So class padding of 2 on both the x-axis and the y-axis. We'll have a BG, which is a background of slate color, and Tailwind offers different colors, so you can actually play around with the colors, and you can style your application according to your own choices. After that, we'll have a border. So border bottom denoted by the word B of 2, and after that we'll have the color for the border. So border slate, and I'll give it 200. Inside this list item, I will have a span which will display the name of the contact. So I will use item dot name, and I will give it some classes as well. So class font hyphen light, and I will give it a big font size, so text hyphen 3XL, and this will give a bigger font size to this particular span. Now we can come back to the browser and see how it looks like. So it's occupying half of the width of the screen, and it's starting to show up the items over here on this side. We only have 2, so that's why it's showing 2 items, but now we'll also add the phone, email, and some other buttons as well. The next thing we'll work on is the email part, and I'll create a div for that because we'll have the email and the phone in the same line. So after the span, I have a div, and inside the div I will create a span element. This span will have 2 things. One will be a icon to display that it's an email, and one will be a span for the email as a text. So I'll use item dot email, and that will be the email written over here. And inside the span one, I'll use the icon, and we have Tailwind icons as well, and that they are called hero icons, I believe. And I'll just search for that in Google. You can come over here and you can just copy the SVG. So I'll use mail and copy any SVG that you like and paste it over here. So if I save that and show you in the browser, we can see that we are starting to getting the SVGs and other information on the screen as well. Now, because the icon and the name are coming in 2 separate lines, I will go to the parent span for these 2 and give it a class of flex, and then items hyphen center to align the items in the middle. And after that, I'll do the same thing but for the phone. So I'll copy the span, paste it one more time, and I will remove this SVG because I will use the SVG for a phone, and this will be for a phone. So I'll come back to the hero icons website and basically try to find something for a phone. So let's say use this one and paste the SVG over here. And if we save that, we should see the result over here. So we get the email, we get the phone as well. Now it's time to bring both of them in line. So for that, we will work on the main span that is enclosing these this email part and the phone part, which is this div. So I will give it classes of flex, gap of 10, so that we have a gap between these two elements, and we have empty of 4, which is a margin top of 4, and now it should come up in a single line. And things are starting to look better now. We also have to give some paddings between this email and the icon, but you can give it yourself, or you can easily come over here to the website, to the application, and inside the span we can give it some classes over here. So class margin start of, let's say, 2, and same thing for the phone as well. So if I expand on phone, we should get the margin of the starting point, and we should get some space between this icon and this text over here. The next thing we'll work on is still inside the list item, but we will show some buttons. One button, let's say, for calling the user based on the phone that we have, and one will be to delete an item. And we'll just keep the button for now, but we'll work on the delete functionality from the API side a little later on. So for that, I will create a div and I will give it some classes. So class is equal to mt4, margin top of 4, then flex width full to occupy the full, and gap of 4. Inside over here we will have two anchor elements, or one anchor element and one a button. So the first anchor element, we will give it a class of background emerald. I'll give it some light green color, and then padding y on the y-axis of 1, padding on the x-axis of 2, some rounded corners, so rounded small, and a cursor of pointer. Then in this, as a text for this anchor element, we will use an SVG icon again. So I'll go to the hero icons, still on the phone, but I'll use a different icon this time. Let's say copy SVG and paste it inside this anchor element. Now to be able to use the call facility, I'll give it an href property, and this is what HTML provides us, HTML5 especially. And using curly braces, I will use some text first. So in single quotes, I'll say tell and a colon. And after that, using a plus to concatenate these two strings together, I'll also say item.phone. And when this gets rendered on the screen, it will basically open a telephone conversation. If you are on the mobile device, you can also choose an application that can open or create some calls. So it basically, if I hover over it, you can see on the bottom corner as well, it tries to call that particular number, and if I do this one, it will call this particular number. So we get the facility to call a number directly from the contact list, which it is for. And the next thing that we'll have is, if somebody wants to delete a particular contact, we should also have a button for that. And I'll give a button attribute a class of bg-slate of 50, and let's say text dark, padding on the y-axis of 2, padding on the x-axis of 4, rounded SM. And you can play around with these properties, and feel free to change this to whatever your liking is. After that, I will give this type of the button as a button and not a submit type, because we'll have a click event on this one a little later on, and we will use this button to delete a particular contact. Now I'll also use another icon like a delete icon, or I can search it from bin and copy the SVG and paste it over here. So if I save this, let's see how it looks like on the screen. So we want the color to be red, so I can change the color of the SVG inside this class attribute over here and say text-red, and you can choose a color as well. Now if I come back, hopefully this should be red over here if I refresh it. And you can see we have two buttons, one for call, one for delete. And slowly, if you have more number of items over here, we'll also have a overflow bar or a scroll bar over here on this side. So I'll go ahead and add some more contacts just to show you that. You can see that I've added multiple contacts over here, and when you grow a size which is larger than the size of the screen, we get a scroll bar so that the user can easily scroll through the contacts. Hi everyone, in the last lecture we were working on getting all the contacts and displaying them on the screen, and we also styled our application with Tailwind CSS, and it's looking really nice. Now in this lecture we are going to work on the form side of things, where we will submit a request to create a new form from our Angular application to the web API that we have. So basically creating a new contact from the Angular side of things. To do that, let's come back to Visual Studio Code and first of all make some changes to the app.component.ts file. In here we will use Angular reactive forms and create a form so that it can capture the values when a user submits the value to the form. So first of all, we'll have to import a few modules. So after the async pipe, I will also import the forms module that Angular provides us, and also the reactive forms module as well. Now after the injection that we have done, we will create a new contacts form, and this is a variable, and we'll give it a value. So we'll say this is equal to new form group. So first of all, we will create a form group, and inside the form group we will basically create an object which will have different form controls. So first control that we want is to get the name for the contact. So we basically will have the fields that we want to display, and related to each field that we want to display and capture value for, we want to have a control for that particular form element. So we'll have this new form control, and we can also give it a type, and that's string, because name is a string. You can also give it an initial value inside over here, so we can give it an empty value. After that, we will capture the email. So email is equal to or colon new form control. Again, that will be string or null, because our email is optional, and the default value for this will be null. The next thing will be the phone. Again, new form control of type string, and the default value is empty. And the final thing is the favorite, new form control of type boolean, and by default we'll have a value of false. Now that we have created a form on the TypeScript side of things, we will use this form and bind the values from the HTML over here. So I will minimize the right hand side, which is displaying the contacts over here, so that we have more room to play around in the left hand side over here. So first of all, I will create a form element and remove the action attribute, and I will give the two things that I'll use, which is first of all is an event, the ng submit. So whenever this form is getting submitted, we will call a method. Let's call it the on form submit method, and this is a method that we will create soon inside the app component.ts file. Now to bind this form from the contacts form that we have created over here, we use the form group. So form group that we will use, and we will assign the value of the form that we created, which is the contacts form. Inside the form, we will have to create the elements. So first of all, let's create a heading, which is the h1 tag. I will give it some class is equal to padding on the y-axis of 10, font extra bold, and text, a very large text, let's say 5XL. Again, you are free to choose the classes, and you can use whatever you want to over here. I'll call it contactly, which is the name of our web application. After that, we will create the elements which the user will type into. So the first div will have a class margin top of 2, and we'll basically copy paste this multiple times. So first of all, we'll have a label for name. Class is font bold, and the label will say this is the label for the name element. Then we'll create an input type of text, and we can have classes for that to style this. Width of full, padding of 2, border of 2, and then rounded of SM. Also some margin top of 2 to have some separation between this label and this input element. Now the crucial thing of binding this element with this form so that we can receive the values on this side of things is using an attribute of form control name. And this will be the same name as we are using for the form control over here. So I have to specify name over here so that it can correctly match this element with the form control name. So with that, I can also create the on form submit method. So after this, I'll say on form submit, and when it comes over here, I will log the value. So console.log this.contactsForm.value, and we can see it in the console window. So let's come to the browser, and we have this form over here. It doesn't look pretty at the moment. If I inspect it, we also need a button so that we can submit this form. So quickly come back to the HTML, and we'll also create a button so that we can submit this form. So I will use this div container, remove the label, and add a new button. This button will have the type of submit, which is also a default option, but we will still specify it. A class of bg-slate-800, so dark background, and text of white, px of 4, padding y of 2, rounded small, and a width of full. So rounded is small and width is full. And the name of the button, let's say call it save or add, and let's see how it looks like in the browser. There was a typo in over here, so bg-slate-800, and it wasn't just displaying on the screen. But once we do that, we should see the add button over here. Clicking the add button will send the on form submit method and should console log the values over here. So if I say the name as Samir Saini, if I click on the add button, you can see that the form is getting logged, the values of the form is getting logged, and in here we are getting the email, favorite, name, phone, and all the other fields. So at the moment I only have the name field, and hence the name value is coming over here. Apart from that, we are getting the default values that we assign inside the app.component.ts file. So we will do the same thing to other elements as well. So I will copy the name element and change that to email. The type, this is for email, the type is email, and the form control name, which is very crucial, is email, and this should match, you know, whatever we have in the form over here. Next thing will be for the phone, and let's say call this phone. Form control name is phone and type is text. And the last one is a checkbox. For checkbox, we'll have the same div container, but with little different values. We'll have the label. For is favorite, and we'll have the different classes for the label for the checkbox. So we'll have flex, items-center, and font-bold, and this is just to style the checkbox. If you want to, you know, make it look simple, you can totally do that. Inside here we will have the input type of checkbox, and that's the checkbox element. I can remove the name and ID field. The most important thing over here is the form control name, which is equal to favorite, the one that I've defined inside the TS file. And also we can give some classes of height of 4, width of 4, and that's optional as well. Then also give it some name. We will use the word favorite, so this is for favorite. And if I come back to the browser, this is how it should look like. Let's also add some padding to this form so that it looks a little better. And over here as a class, I'll say px of 4, and let's add some padding to the x-axis over here. So now if I fill some values over here and favorite, if I click on add, it should log this details to the console. I can see that the phone is not coming through, but everything else seems to be working, and we can check why. If I come back to here, phone is here, we have the phone form control name as phone, but you can clearly see I have typed the phone as a capital letter phone, but the form control name was a lowercase character p, and that was a mismatch, and hence it was not binding the values correctly. So this is a prime example of how you can easily make mistakes, but make sure that the form control name or whatever you are giving over here is coming from the contacts form. If it's easy, you can also copy the value and then paste it over there. So now we are getting the values inside the on form submit method. We don't have to log it anymore because we know that the values are coming over there. Now we'll create a constant and say add contact request, which is equal to a object, and the object will be the same object as what we expect in the controller add method. So the add method wants to receive this request object, which has 4 properties: name, email, phone, and favorite, and that's what we are going to provide to this post method from here. So we'll say name is coming from this dot contacts form dot value dot name, After that, we'll do the same thing for email. Then for phone. And the last one is favorite. Right, so now we have the request object ready. We will use the HTTP client again to make a post request this time. The first time we did was a GET request. Now we will do a post request because our API, if you look at the controller, it wants a post request. So let's come back and we'll say this.http.post method, and the post method receives two arguments. The first one is the URL, and you can copy the URL from the GET method over here. And to confirm why I'm doing that, I can go back to Swagger, and if you see the post endpoint, it also goes to the same location, but the only change, how the application knows if it's a post call or a GET call is using that particular HTTP verb. You can see in the curl request we use the post verb, and in the GET request we use the GET call over here. The second argument that we want to pass is the request object, which we have over here, and that's the body for this post request. Now by itself this won't do anything. Even if you click the button, it won't make a call to the API, because this is an observable, and observables needs to be subscribed before it can actually transmit a value. So we will use the subscribe method this time, and we will use the next method. We'll have the value. So when we have a success in subscribing, the next method will get a value, and we can then use this value to know that this was a success, and we can do anything with the value as well. So first thing we can do is, you can log it to the console, and this value will also contain the ID. So that will be a good check. If you're getting the ID back, that means the contact has been created. The other thing you can do is to load the list again, because you are submitting the request but you're not loading the list again, so you won't see the contact unless you refresh your application yourself. So you can do this thing, you can copy this inside the next method and say this.contact. So this way you are refreshing this observable with the new values coming back from the API. And the third thing you can do is to reset the form, so that you can use that form to add another value. So we'll say this.contactsform.reset. And with that in place, I'll save the application, and this should work now. And to prove that it's coming to the API, I'll also put a breakpoint over here, and when the call is made, it should hit that breakpoint, and I can just let it run after that, because this method is already been tested from Swagger. So our method works, we know that. Now our application is running, and I've filled some information in, and I'll click the add button. The add button basically gives the call from the Angular side to the API where I have hit the endpoint. I can now disable that and press continue. Now the call succeeded, because in the console you can see the object returned back from the API, and we get the new ID back. Also, the second check was that we should get the newly created ID in the list over here, so we can see Steve Smith in the list over here. And third thing was that the form has to reset, and that's working fine as well. So you can see that our application is working really nicely. The only last thing that is left is that we should be able to delete the contact from the Angular application, and in order to do that, we should have a API endpoint that is accepting that delete functionality. So let's first work on the API so that we can test our delete functionality, and for that we will create a new endpoint, and this time we will use the HTTP delete verb. So we'll create the method definition, public I action result delete contact, and the delete contact will basically receive the unique identifier that of the contact that it has to delete, and we do that through the route parameter. So we'll basically get the ID from the route, and using the double quotes, I can use curly braces over here. I can define the identifier and the type as well using the colon, and the type of our identifier is GUID. And we'll use the same thing over here. So the same name has to go inside as a parameter to this method, so that the ASP.NET Core can basically map the value from the route to the variable over here. So I'll say GUID, and the name of the GUID is ID, and make sure this matches this. So now that we have the ID coming into the method, the first thing we'll do is to check if the ID actually exists in our database or not. And we can do that using the help of dbcontext. We'll say dbcontext.contacts.find, and we can pass the unique identifier to this find method, and it only works with identifiers. So make sure you're passing an identifier and nothing else. And we basically get a result back, and we'll say contact is equal to. So we have pasted the result inside this variable called contact, and if I hover over it, you can see it's a nullable contact. So we are checking the contact may exist or it may not as well. So what we can do is we can have a check over here. We'll say if contact is not null, that means the contact was found, and close brackets over here. If the contact was found, we want to delete this contact. So we'll use the dbcontext class again, .contacts.remove method, and pass this contact entity to this remove method. And you know what to do next. We have to save the changes. So dbcontext.save changes. Now whatever happens, we can just basically return OK, that the contact was deleted. If we found out or we didn't find, we don't have to explain that to the client. We'll just send an OK response back. Now we can test this application by running the web API and test it via Swagger. As you can see in Swagger, we get the new endpoint, and that's the delete endpoint, and we restart the application, so there shouldn't be anything in our application at the moment. We should get an empty list, but I can easily create one. So now I have one item in the contacts, and the ID of that particular contact is this one. So I'll copy the ID and use and test the delete endpoint. So I'll try it out, paste the ID over here and click on execute, and this should give us an OK response back. And if it did, we basically have deleted the contact. So if I go to the get endpoint again, I see the empty list again. So now it's time to make changes to our Angular application so that it can work correctly with the web API and it can delete the items. But for that, I'll just quickly add this entry again and go back to the application to check it. On the Angular side of things, the last thing that is left is to implement this delete button, so that whenever the user clicks on this delete button, that particular contact gets deleted. And for that, we'll come to the to Visual Studio Code and the HTML page. We have this button over here inside this list, which is on the right hand side. We have this button, and on click of this button, we should be able to run some code. So basically, we will use the click event, and that's inside square round brackets. Click is equal to, and you can define a method. Let's say give it a name of onDelete. And it's now time to create this method inside here. But this onDelete method will take that particular unique identifier of each row and of each contact. So over here, I can give it the item.id over here, which is the unique identifier. So I'll come back to app.component.ts file, and below or above the onFormSubmit method, we can say onDelete, and it needs an ID. So ID is of type string. So it will use this ID and make a delete request. So again, using the HTTP client, we'll say this.http.delete, and the delete also goes to a URL. So I'll use the same URL, but along with the URL, I'll also have to pass the unique identifier as the route. So instead of using these ones, I'll use the other type of string and use string interpolation, and use curly braces over here so that I can inject the ID as part of this URL. This is an HTTP request again, so it needs a subscription. So I'll subscribe to this method, and when the value is a success, it will come to the next method over here, and we'll say value. And as a value, we're just not getting anything, but we'll just refresh the list again. So I can say this.contacts is equal to get contacts, and also say alert item deleted. and this will only work when we get a success response back. So we can now test our application. We only have one contact, so if I press on the delete button, it says item deleted as an alert box, and if I press OK, this list should clear out as well. So we get the no contacts formed, and we basically have no other lists in here, no other contacts. And if you want, you can add it again from this Angular application. And we get it over here, and if I refresh it, it stays there because it's been added to the web API, and we can delete it again as well. So you can see how we created this full stack web application where we created the API, where we created the front end side of things using Angular. We used Angular reactive forms as well. And I hope you get a view of how we can combine these two technologies together to make full stack applications. Again, I'll put the link of this project in a GitHub repo in the description of this video. So if you want, you can go there and you can get that particular project and make it up and running in your system. Also, if you like this video, please press the like button, share this video with your friends, and also subscribe to the channel so that you receive my next video as well. I thank you all for watching this series. Have a good one. See you in the next one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss my next upload. Thank you for watching. Have a nice one.